Urbex. Definition. Urbex is an amalgamation of the terms urban and exploration and denotes the investigation of abandoned, man-made structures such as homes, office buildings, factories, and tunnels. I live in the Canadian version of the Rust Belt, close to both nature and the derelict factories of our post-industrial age. But on this particular evening, our target was medical, not industrial. The abandoned General Hospital, closed early in the century, a place where the old man had worked as a teenager. His job? Dietary technician. In other words, he was a glorified dishwasher who delivered meal trays to patients. The hospital was situated in an older part of town, but there were still lots of people and traffic in the immediate area, so we waited for night before approaching the complex. I was with my usual exploration partners, Mike, a really laid-back dude, and Kyle. Well, Kyle was just Kyle, and you had to put up with it. The first thing we noticed was what we didn't see. The usual warning signs saying that entry was prohibited and that the premises were under 24-hour security protection. In fact, the door in the wooden fencing, which surrounded the grounds, stood open, wide open. We couldn't believe it, but could only think that the construction workers on site had left it open deliberately. Maybe they were driving trucks in and out and couldn't be bothered to close the gate. Of course, they might be open if security was on site doing a perimeter check. So we waited as the darkness took control, but after 15 minutes, we concluded that no one was there and that the gate was simply open for whatever reason. And it was time to commence exploring. We went up first to the roof to take in the view. A full devil's moon hung overhead as we looked down at the older section of town and took a little video. And then we began exploring the vacant rooms on the top floor. Everything, all the furnishings, had been removed, leaving just the 4 bare walls. In the first room we entered, we found a couple of empty Mickey bottles and graffiti, the usual F-bombs and anatomical drawings. High school kids behaving badly. The next room, however, was different and gave us pause. The bare white walls had been smeared with dull brown stuff, which prompted Mike to ask, "Is that blood?" "It's more likely feces," Kyle remarked in his usual truculent manner. Someone had drawn a pentagram on the floor with chalk, and there were the remains of several gutted candles, as well as a few empty and broken wine bottles. "I don't like this," Mike said. Truth was, neither did I. Kyle scoffed. "Can't you guys see you're being pranked? This whole thing looks like something out of a bad horror movie, unless the shit was smeared by some hobo." "I still don't like it," Mike said. Don't be such a pussy." While I tended to agree with Kyle that it was probably a prank, I understood Mike's apprehensions. What kind of creeps would fabricate such a scene? And did we want to risk meeting them? Or the people that would rub blood or crap on a wall? I also found the lack of security troubling. We usually had to dodge them to enter a site. But not this time. It was too easy. In the end, we agreed to continue, and the whole thing turned into a massive yawn. All the lower floors were pretty much deserted, pretty much vacant, although we did find the remains of more youthful parties and further evidence that some squatters had tried camping out in the building. We reached the ground floor, taking some pictures and video, but as I said, there wasn't much of interest to see. Mike was for leaving then, but Kyle wanted to descend into the basement. "I'm not leaving before I see something good," he said. Turning to me, he added, "Your old man used to work here. What's down there?" "The kitchen, the dish room with the big Hobart dishwasher, locker rooms." "Anything else?" "The morgue." I should have kept my mouth shut, for once Kyle knew that, we had to go down and explore it. It was pitch dark as we groped our way slowly down the stairs. When we got to the bottom, Kyle asked, "Which way to the icebox?" "Huh?" "The morgue, dumbass." I had a general idea as to the layout of the basement, and so a general idea of where the morgue was. Not that I was going to share it with Kyle. Like Mike, I was creeped out and wanted to call it a night. "I think it was over in the back corner," I answered, keeping it vague. "But you're not going to see anything. Any equipment there, they would have pulled out long ago." "Well, I'm going to have a look," Kyle said, heading off, leaving Mike and I no choice but to follow. First rule of urban exploration: stick together. We groped our way along a darkened corridor and came abreast of a large open area of scattered tables and chairs, the basement cafeteria. So we had to check out the kitchen area, and son of a bitch, all the equipment appeared to be there. Dusty, cobwebbed, but there. Even my old man's legendary Hobart dishwasher was there. "Now, try to tell me we won't find anything in the morgue," Kyle crowed. "Who knows? Maybe we'll even find a stiff." We continued to fumble our way down the pitch-black hallway, our flashlights casting weird shadows which shifted, moved, and vanished. Suddenly Mike stiffened. "What's that?" he whispered. We turned, but all we could see was a dirty but empty corridor filled with dancing shadows. "What?" I asked. "I thought I saw someone looking out from that room," he said, pointing with his flashlight towards an open doorway partway down the hall. "What was it?" Kyle demanded, annoyed because he thought Mike was chickening out. "I didn't really see anything," Mike answered, his voice rising into a whine. "Just a flash of white, eh?" "Shit, your eyes are just playing tricks on you," Kyle concluded. We found it at the end of the corridor. There was even a sign above the metal door. "Morgue." The metal door didn't creak. It shrieked, and as we pushed it open, Kyle chortled, "Looks like the stuff's all..." And he stopped dead in the middle of his sentence. We stood facing a metal examining table on which lay a body, the uniformed body of a security guard, who appeared to be very dead. For once, Kyle was speechless, but Mike had to ask, Is he? I was saved having to answer by the pounding. At first, it was just one loud bang, as if a giant hand had smacked one of the black metal cabinets along the back wall, the drawers they put the stiffs in. One bang would have been bad enough, but then they all started banging, the sound overlapping in a clanging metal cacophony in which we had to yell to be heard. Not that we had anything intelligent to say other than, "What the fuck?" Mike turned to run, only to scream. I looked over his shoulder. In the middle of the hallway stood a woman wearing a white hospital gown. I shone my torch on her, and as I did, she raised her head to reveal 2 black eyes and a mouth grinning in a rictus of death. And then she charged. We jumped back into the room, just as all the cabinet drawers opened, and the stiffs inside sat up. The stiffs sat up and howled. I don't really know what happened next, just that I started running. I physically plowed into the woman in white, which felt like running through a million dusty cobwebs, and then I was free and running. When I made it outside, I saw a security vehicle, but no sign of a guard. Or was that him in the morgue? Eventually, Mike joined me. Where's Kyle? I sputtered. Isn't he with you? Mike said between deep, gulping breaths. He wasn't. We waited. But after 10 minutes, it was obvious he wasn't coming out. Think they got him? Mike asked. Dunno. We gotta go back for him. Sorry, Mike said, turning so he wasn't looking at me. No way I'm going back in there. In the end, I did. I stood at the top of the stairs, leading down into the darkened basement, and called, Kyle! Kyle! And heard him screaming, Help me! Help me! I am down here! Help me! So I went down, right? Right? Nope. We called the cops from a payphone outside Tim Hortons and reported a dead body in the old hospital. Next day, the news reported the discovery of the security guard's body in his security vehicle, a middle-aged man dead of a heart attack. Kyle has never been found, and a week later, Mike disappeared, and I started walking in my sleep. I dream Kyle and Mike are calling to me and waiting for me at the top of the stairs, waiting for me so they can take me down into the dark basement and to the morgue with the others. The other night, I woke up, fully dressed, standing just outside the abandoned hospital in the dark. So soon, I too will disappear. I have only one final request. I want top drawer. Outside of town, out on the bald prairie, is an urban explorer's dream. Seriously. Cruising down the lonely highways and the isolated backroads, one is confronted by ghosts, abandoned farms, and farmhouses. The plains were once dominated by family farms, but as farms got bigger and more people left the land, the houses were left behind to slowly fade into the landscape. We loved exploring these places where people's lives had unfolded and enjoyed taking pictures and video of our discoveries. And that is what we were doing this fall afternoon. It was an overcast day, and I was getting worried that we might get caught in a rain shower, or, this time of year, a possible snow squall, and on a dirt road too. Unfortunately, we had reached an area where we were about equal distance from all the roads leading back to town. In other words, we were out in the middle of nowhere, which is when we spotted the house. If a dwelling could look like a ghost, this place sure did. Its wooden siding was weathered and cracked by the elements and by years of neglect. It had been white once, but now it was a leprous gray, and the black shingled roof was sagging in front, like black bangs falling into a pair of eyes, the eyes being the missing front windows. We had to stop. Had to. Casey, Elaine, Patrick, and moi. "Let me get some shots of the outside, against the gray sky," Patrick said. He had a proper digital camera, while the rest of us just used our phones. The sky gives it a really dramatic quality. Yeah. "I just hope it doesn't start snowing," I said. To be honest, I would have been just as happy to be heading back, but... "You worry too much," Elaine laughed. But there was an edge to her voice, which I didn't like. It truly was an isolated spot. The house faced onto the dirt road, while behind it stretched brown fields underneath a graphite sky. A pair of dirt ruts led up to the place, a primitive driveway, whilst beside the dwelling was a gnarled tree barren of leaves. In back stood a barn of weathered, unpainted boards. We stepped onto the sagging porch, entering through the opening where the front door had been. We had expected to find the place in shambles, but instead, the living room was empty of furnishings, but not empty. The wooden floorboards appeared relatively clean, although there was a woman's sweater and some empty wine bottles scattered about. And there was also a Ouija board in the middle of a circle of gutted candles. "Looks like somebody was having a seance," Elaine said, again with her sardonic laugh. "In an abandoned house? In the middle of nowhere," I said. "Spooky." Casey wanted to use the Ouija board to see if we could contact any spirits which might be present. I wasn't enthusiastic, as I really wanted to start heading back. Patrick went outside, saying he was going to take some pictures of the barn before it got too dark. "I guess we should light what's left of these candles if we're going to use the Ouija board," Casey suggested. "Okay," I said, "but be sure to blow them out when we leave." "Oh, you worry too much," Elaine snarked. She was smiling when she said it, but again, there was that edge. Besides, she was repeating herself. Casey lit the candle stubs, and we knelt around the board, fingers on the planchette. She began with the standard question. "Is there anyone there?" The planchette moved quickly to yes. "You're moving it," Elaine accused me. "I'm not even touching it," I snapped. I was getting really tired of this woman. "Look, it's moving by itself," Casey squeaked, and sure enough, the planchette was rocketing back and forth, spelling out L-E-A-V-E. Leave. "Fine by me. I think this is our cue to go," I announced, as lightly as possible. "Why?" Elaine again. I was just about to open my mouth and tell her off when we both heard Casey gasp. We turned towards her, noticed her horrified expression, and then looked to see what she was staring at. Standing in a doorway off to our left was the figure of a woman in a white night dress, or shroud. She stood stooped forward, so her long black hair covered her face, and as we watched in petrified silence, she raised her head, and we saw her face, the bloated, greenish-purple face of a corpse, its mouth split in a grinning rictus of death. I grabbed Casey by the arm and pulled her towards the front door, while behind me I heard Elaine bursting into peals of hysterical laughter. Once outside, I told Casey to get in the car and to lock all the doors. "What about Elaine?" she cried, tears running down her flushed cheeks. "Elaine can take care of herself," I bellowed. I'm going to get Patrick." And then I was off. I didn't look back to see if Casey had obeyed me or not. The entrance to the old barn was a gaping black hole. I charged into it, yelling, "Patrick! Patrick!" And then I stopped dead. Patrick was in the middle of the shambling barn, hanging from a beam, his body swaying in a gentle arc, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back. I ran over to him to see if I could get him down. But he was dead. I think he was dead. I wanted to get him down, but I didn't have a knife or anything to cut with. And then the woman, the dead thing in white, the ghost, was standing in the open doorway of the barn, staring in at me, and that slash-like mouth, I think it was smiling at me, smiling. There was a gap in the wall at the rear of the barn, and I took it, all the time saying, over and over, Patrick, I'm so sorry, man. I'm so sorry." I said it in my mind, I think. Or maybe I did say it out loud. I ran for the car, consumed with the idea of getting away, not thinking things clearly. If this thing in white was a ghost, it really couldn't hurt me, right? Right? Then why was I so overwhelmed by fear, stark primal fear? And what happened to Patrick? He was dead, right? Right? Maybe he was still alive. Maybe. Gotta get help. Help! The car! I reached the car in a matter of moments and was about to open my door when I saw it. Casey didn't appear to be in the car, but the dead woman was sitting in the driver's seat, my seat, looking up at me. God, that smile! I took off and began running across the wide expanse of prairie. The darkness was beginning to take control, and I kept looking behind me to see if I was being followed, and I thought I could see something white and flapping in the shadows. So I started to run harder. I had no plan, just to get to a road or somewhere where there might be some traffic and I could get some help. God, these fields were so huge, endless. After what felt like hours, I came to a road. Asphalt. That meant it was a major road, that there would be cars. Off in the gloom, I could see the beams of approaching headlights and felt deliverance was at hand. I waited, and as the car approached, I could see it was a beige, Toyota Camry, and that it was my car. My car. It stopped where I was standing, and the driver rolled down its window. It was the ghost, the reanimated corpse, and it was still gaping at me with that sardonic and predatory grin. Casey, Elaine, and Patrick were in the back seat. I wasn't sure if any of them were still alive. No one spoke, but a voice in my head said, "Get in." I got in. Did I have a choice? Besides, they appeared to be going my way. In southern Ontario, near both Lake Erie and the Grand River, there lies an abandoned subdivision consisting of around 30 bungalows and two-story homes built in the 90s, but never lived in. Instead, they have stood alone and forgotten. The homes were part of a novel community that never was. The sign at the highway, which announced the exit to the town, we'll call it Talbot, has vanished, and all that remains is the road. In other words, the place is an urban explorer's dream. University was over for the summer, so we made the long drive out to the middle of nowhere. We arrived at dusk, driving slowly up the rutted road to avoid the bumps. The subdivision stood near a large building, apparently an unused town hall. Near a large building and an artificial lake, now choked with weeds and water lilies, all of it surrounded by barren fields. In truth, the place looked like an abandoned movie set. We parked in a large tree-lined parking lot in front of the town hall. There were no other vehicles in sight. "Well, where shall we begin?" I said. Kira shuddered. "This is so creepy." We walked over to the town hall and found the front door to be padlocked, which wasn't surprising. So we headed around to the back of the building, where there was a deck overlooking the weed-choked lake. It was the sound that attracted us, the bellowing and galumping of what sounded like a million frogs. But as we stood there, the loud amphibian chorus began to hush and die away, until there was complete and utter silence, a silence more unnerving than the previous cacophony. We could hear nothing at first, not even the sound of the wind or the distant traffic on Highway 3. But then we perceived another sound, a strange, low moaning that was faint at first, but which gradually grew louder and louder. It was strange and unearthly and equally unnerving. But then it too faded away to nothingness. For a few moments we were silent too. Then I suggested, "Shall we check out some of these houses?" "They're going to be locked up," Patience said. But they weren't. The nearest house was a white two-story affair. We knocked on the front door, on the off chance there was someone there. Not that we had seen a single living soul since we arrived. But when no one answered, I tried the door, which was unlocked and swung open. To reveal a fully furnished living room from out of the 1980s. A number of things caught my eye. a sofa of garish pattern, a lava lamp, a TV atop a portable stand which held a VCR player? A VCR player with tapes? I picked up one. Zombie Lake. Hey, I'd heard of that movie, I think. For a moment I considered taking it with me. But what would I ever play it on? Despite the age of the furnishings, the place seemed lived in, as if the people had just stepped out and would be back any moment. Of course, we checked out the dining room, and no, there was no pot boiling on the stove or food on the plates, but the table had been set with plates and cutlery, as if a meal was about to be served. It was Nick who went upstairs to check the bedrooms, and who came down in a hurry. We stared, as he was obviously in a panic. It took him a moment to spit it out, but then he sputtered, There's dead bodies up there." "What are you talking about?" I demanded. Nick fought to get himself under control. There's a bunch of people up there dead, lying on their beds. They're all butt naked and..." Nick hesitated, then finally, "And they don't have any damn heads." Of course, I had to go look, while the ladies, Kira and Patience, stayed downstairs with Nick. Sure enough, there were 4 of them, a man and 3 women, all thin and dirty looking and nude and headless. I didn't look at the bodies any longer than I had to, but I looked long enough to realize they hadn't been decapitated. Instead, there were gaping holes at the end of each neck, as if the heads had been twisted off. Not that I had much time to think about it, for that's when the screaming started downstairs. I ran down and into a scene of perfect pandemonium and insanity. My friends were running around the room like chickens with their heads cut off. Oh, ouch. That was a poor choice of words. My friends were running around the room, crashing into walls and furnishings, and pursued by 4 disembodied floating heads. There were 3 female heads, with a lone male, corresponding to the naked bodies upstairs. The heads, or at least the faces, had a certain similarity. They were thin and dark, with thin lips, long, lank, greasy hair, and reddish flashing eyes. They kept snapping their jaws, as if they were trying to bite my friends with their big yellow teeth. Somehow we managed to get back outside, where we made a mad rush for the car, harassed by the heads which kept trying to bite or butt us. We made it and got inside the Santa Fe. The girls were screaming and crying and hiccuping. They made an awful racket, while Nick had his face in his hands. As the ugly, dirty heads hung just outside the windows, leering in at us, and this is gross, kissing and licking the glass. My hands were shaking so bad I could hardly turn the key in the ignition. But in the end I did, and we shot out of there like a bat out of hell. I raced down the road, no longer worried about potholes, and the heads kept pace with us, leering at us through the windows, their red eyes flickering, while their long, greasy hair flowed out behind them. Who knows? They may have followed us all the way home, if the truck hadn't appeared from out of the darkness. It was an old, powder blue Chevy pickup, circa 1953. It loomed out of the shadows, then turned sideways, blocking the road and making me slam on my brakes to avoid slamming into it. I was swearing my head off. Oops. I was swearing, and sure the heads were going to get us. But they were gone. The heads were gone. A man jumped out of the pickup and strode up to my driver's side window. He was old and bow-legged, with a long white beard and a red baseball cap. He tapped on my window, but no way I was rolling it down, so he had to yell through the glass. "What do you think you're doing?" "Driving around." "Here?" Yeah." "So, you saw them?" That convinced me to roll my window down. "What were those things?" "The floating heads?" the old guy said. "They're floaters." "What?" I sputtered. I had no idea what he was talking about. "Floaters. The floaters are evil beings that can detach their heads from their bodies while in a trance state, the heads then being able to fly or float through the night to attack their victims. Their attacks are mainly psychological or psychic, but their bite is venomous and can make you sick or kill you. They often strip naked to go into their trance state." "Jesus," I muttered, not sure if I believed it. But I had seen those things. They were real. A nest or coven of these things appeared soon after the subdivision was built and began attacking the residents. That's the real reason them houses, hell, the entire town was abandoned. I generally keep an eye on things around here, mainly to keep fools like you out of trouble." Normally I would have been angry at being called a fool, but now I just wanted to get away. "I suggest you leave," the old guy began, but I cut him off. "Don't worry, we're going. And don't come back. Not bloody likely. And if I can offer you some more advice," he yelled after us, "don't tell anybody about this. They won't believe it." "But you believe it, don't you?" I couldn't make something like this up, right? 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 After the urban explorers left, the old guy went and sat in his truck. In the distance, a strange, low moaning sound could be heard, a sound which gradually faded into silence, and then, shortly after, the pickup was surrounded by 4 thin, ugly heads, which stared in at the old guy. "They won't be back," the old guy said. "Now we can hunt undisturbed. The bugs are really good tonight." And, with a plop, the old man's head, detached from his thick body, floated through the open window of the truck, and then he led his flock of floating heads out into the all-surrounding darkness. The moral of the story: urban exploration is fun, but don't lose your head over it. Floating heads, aka night floaters or floaters, are an anomalous phenomena reported from various places in Canada and throughout North America. The name refers to the ability of certain individuals to detach their heads from the trunks of their bodies, the heads then being able to fly or float at will. They are said to then attack unsuspecting victims, biting them and sometimes even killing them. These night floaters are said to make a moaning sound when at a distance, a sound which fades to nothingness as they approach. The laugh. I'm big into urban exploration, and even though I live on the Canadian prairies, there are plenty of abandoned structures to explore. Farmhouses, schools, factories, power plants, hotels, whole ghost towns, and hospitals, even mental hospitals. The site in question was on the outskirts of a small city to the south of where I live. It was a huge complex with a 3-story main building with 2 extensive wings, the whole covering several acres. The complex had been shut down in the late 1970s, and since that time, a number of urban legends of medical experiments gone wrong, of the escape of homicidal patients, and of ghostly phenomena had entered the local whisper stream, and, by some, had been accepted as fact. Given a history like that, how could we resist a visit? How could we resist? We arrived at dusk so as not to attract attention, parking our vehicle in an isolated spot behind the main building. There didn't appear to be any guards on site, but they might patrol the place by car, and we didn't want to get caught. We also didn't want to break in. Trespassing was one thing, B&E was another. But we found a slightly open window at the rear of the building and crawled in. We were in an old storeroom, its shelves filled with old cardboard boxes which appeared to have contained cleaning supplies. A large wooden table stood in the middle of the small room, forcing you to edge around it in order to reach the door. And that was what I was doing when Zach stopped me with, "Look at this table." "Yeah? What about it?" "It's an old table." "Well, where's the dust?" I stared at the table and saw it was perfectly clean, as if it had been recently dusted. Now, in an abandoned building, things are generally covered in a layer of thick dust, but not here. Still, so what? "It looks like somebody cleaned it," Zach said, obviously impressed. Well, maybe this room doesn't get a lot of dust," I answered. "Come on, let's go." We stepped out into the hall, which also appeared to be largely free of dust and debris. In fact, it was too tidy, too clean. "Do you think they might still be working in here?" Kat whispered. "Funny that. How you always whisper when you're sneaking around in an abandoned building." Indeed, I found myself whispering back, "I don't know. Maybe they took out all the stuff they thought they could sell or dispose of. Anyways, it's so quiet. If there's anyone else in here, we'll hear them and can take off, eh?" We started exploring the ground floor, which seemed to consist of a number of large rooms, a dining hall with an abandoned kitchen at one end, a common room which still held a battered couch and a few worn chairs, and an auditorium, complete with stage and curtains. No doubt someone, Zach maybe, would have jumped up onto the stage and started acting the fool. But then we heard the laughter. It was an unnatural, metallic laugh, which sounded like it was coming through speakers. It was incredibly creepy because it was so unnatural. Now, back when I was a kid in grade school, a friend and I had been in a novelty or joke shop where we found this thing called a canned laugh. A canned laugh. It was a small, nondescript, plain metal can, about half the size of a soup can, and when you opened it, you heard, ha 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 ha. I remembered that at the time I thought the gimmick hilariously funny, but hearing the sound now in a supposedly empty building at night was incredibly creepy. If it wasn't paranormal, and I had no reason to go there yet, it meant there were other people in the building, people who may not be friendly, people trying to scare us out. "Is there somebody else in here?" said Alex, reading my mind. "Ah, it's just some kids messing around," Zach snapped. "Okay," I conceded. "But what kids?" "Oh, probably just a bunch of kids from the local high school." "Maybe. But let's try to avoid meeting them, eh?" I thought about climbing up onto the stage and looking behind the curtains to see if anyone was lurking there. But instead, we all crept back out into the hallway, no longer so keen to explore. I think if I'd taken a vote right then, it would have been 3-1 to leave, Zach being the lone holdout. I racked my brain, trying to determine where the strange laughter had come from. It seemed to echo like it was in a stairwell, but up or down, I couldn't say. "Well, where shall we go now?" I said to the group. To which Zach's emphatic answer was, "No way I'm going down in the basement." I couldn't help but smile at his response. But someone else thought it was hilarious, as once again the canned laughter chortled through the gathering gloom. And it was definitely coming from upstairs. "It's gotta be kids," Zach said, adding, "Well, I'm gonna troll them." And with that, he started fake laughing like a maniac. "Be quiet, you fool," I said, instinctively reaching out to grab him. We might have had an altercation. But then Alex cried, "Someone's coming." Sure enough, someone or something was pounding down the stairs from the floor above us. We could hear the crash of their footfalls coming down, as well as see a white approaching light. Whoever they were obviously carrying an LED flashlight. I thought about hiding, about going into one of the nearby rooms, but only for an instant. It was a case of, you can run, but you can't hide. A dark figure appeared at the bottom of the stairwell and came pounding into the hallway, their powerful LED flashlight playing over the walls, the ceiling, the floor, and eventually blinding us. At the same time, the maniacal, metallic laughter seemed to build to a crescendo, as if the sound was exploding in our heads, in our minds. The dark figure proved to be a thin man, all in black, perhaps a uniform, and he was shouting at us, "Get out of here! Get out of here now! Can't you hear it? Can't you hear it coming?" We heard it, an entire wall of demonic and demented fake laughter, so loud it seemed to shake the foundations of the old building, and gave us all ear-splitting headaches. We crashed through a fire door at the end of the hall and sprinted for the car. And outside, you could still hear the laughter. We burnt rubber out of there, and we all just sat there in stunned silence until we reached the highway, when Zach said, "What the hell was that noise? And who was that guy?" "I don't know," I said. "Some kind of security guard or something." "We just got trolled," Zach yelled. "That was all a prank to drive us out of there. Come on, turn around. Let's go back." Both Kat and Alex cried out, "No! No!" So I kept on heading up the highway. I thought I'd put on some music to drown out the argument and calm everybody down. But when I switched on the radio, the car was filled with unnatural metallic laughter, which was incredibly creepy because it was so unnatural. I turned the radio off, but the laughter kept echoing through the car, getting louder and louder and more diabolical as I put my foot down on the accelerator in my attempt to get away, to run away from it. But I couldn't get away. I could not get away. We picked up a hitchhiker, and we cannot make it stop laughing. Laughing. Ha 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 ha. The moral of the story: never pick up a hitchhiker, even if some of them are good for a laugh. For a laugh. If this is your first visit to my channel, please consider subscribing. My name is Warren, and I write and tell original ghost stories and original horror stories featuring such cryptids as the night floaters, werewolves, and the black-eyed children. So again, please consider subscribing. Please help me to reach my goal of 2,500 subs in 2022. Till midnight. Ha 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 ha. Pictures used in today's video, courtesy of Pix Here. That's PX Here, while the music was The Dreadful, The Dread by that patron of the internet, Kevin MacLeod. The maniacal laughter was supplied by one WSJ, and of him, the less said, the better.